funds. The amount the government guarantees X of the fund, and because what they guarantee is more than any rogue.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock.
It's not a problem.
And we're now live streaming. There we go. Good morning to you all. Welcome to the Implementation Committee with myself and co-chair Councillor Brian Scott. We've got Councillor Robinson just coming, and we have Councillor Michael Laws just coming as well. I just cited him. I understand we have no one today on Zoom, so we'll just crack on. But before we do, I've just been having a chat with Mrs. Gardner, and I said I think it's really important that this time we take 2 minutes to acknowledge all those people in Canterbury, all those people in Canterbury been affected by the floods, and we have been given great assistance to them, which is a pleasure to do, and thanks to staff, Mrs. Gardner, for that. We're also willing to do more, should they ask us. And I think it's just a 2-minute acknowledgement of we're thinking of you in Canterbury, we wish you well, we know it's going to be a long recovery, and we're here for you. I'd just like to acknowledge that before we start. Councillor Laws, morning. Councillor Robertson's on her way. So I will open this Implementation Committee paper by going through our topic. Now, I understand we have no apologies today. We don't have any requests for public forum that we know of, Ms. Spector. Confirmation of the agenda. There's no additions or anything. Okay. Have to move that? No, we don't have to worry about that. Conflict of interest. Now, Councillor Scott, you've decided to stand aside, haven't you, for this Implementation Committee paper? Adjacent. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. There we go. And confirmation of minutes. Minutes of 10th of March 2021 Implementation Committee meeting be adopted as true and accurate record with or without changes.
Would you like to move that first?
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Councillor Wilson, would you like to second it? Yeah. Thank you very much. So now matters for consideration, we have 7.1 and we are going to be going on to the draft Lake Tuakatoto Management Plan. Now this is a cracking little report. Good morning, Councillor Robinson. Thanks for joining us. We have 7.1. So this paper provides an update on proposed activities for Lake Tuakatoto catchment over the coming years and signals engagement will occur to allow prioritisation of projects to enhance biodiversity, water quality and recreational values for the lake and the catchment. Our report authors are Andrew Howard, our Manager of Biosecurity and Rural Liaison, and if you haven't met her, he's the lovely Libby Caldwell. You're the Project Delivery Specialist, and we have Dr. Palmer. Now, I take this report as read, but I think because it's such a great report, how about we split it into 3? Would everybody be happy if you want to comment actually on the report itself, perhaps how it's written or anything missed out? Then we'll have some questions. And of course, the last part to this is what have we got? We've got 3 recommendations. So 1 receiving, 1 approves, and to note. So are you happy if we just take that as the first part comes? Does anybody want to actually talk about the report itself? I thought it was very good. It tells us a lot that we don't know. There's a lot of, obviously, fabulous habitat, the birds. I learned a lot about the freshwater mussels in there. Nangakai, everything going on in this little lake. It's quite a gem. I asked Dr. Palmer yesterday. The only thing I was unaware was the size of it, how big Lake Tuakatoto is. It actually is a lot bigger than what you think when you drive past. I've been to in the past to 2 meetings in 2018 where we've talked about Lake Tuakatoto at Kaitangata and the values, and we had people come all around. We had a gentleman from Alexandra who fished as a child and said it was really important to him. So this is really great to see you continuing on that work. Now, before we move into any questions for you, or you might like to talk to the report, does anyone, councillors, want to just comment on the report itself? No? Okay. Councillor Wilson?
Questions.
Yeah, we can go to questions now. If you just before we do that,
let them talk
let's them talk to the paper because it's very good. Would you mind, Libby, just giving us a quick overview? Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Just move that towards you. You've got a soft wee voice.
Soft voice.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a really important project for the community around Kaitangata and Lovell's Creek. There's already an active catchment group in that area. So us being able to support any further work to restore the lake and the tributaries that feed into the lake is really important. So the next steps that we've got at the end of the report is that we would like to go back out to the community and let them know what to re-engage with them about the projects that they had suggested. I think it was 3 years ago, those meetings that you attended, to make sure that they're still relevant to them and that we're going in the right direction with what we are suggesting, and help along similar to what we've done with Tomahawk Lagoon. Let them have a vote on which things we should prioritise. So that's the next step there.
Thank you. Now, more than happy to open up for questions. So, Councillor Wilson, you've got one, followed by Councillor.
The first one is, and I'm certainly the last person to comment on te reo, but we have about 3 different ways it's pronounced around the table. And I, having had to do it on video recently, my understanding is it's Tua Katoto and not Tuakatoto. Yeah, but Toto, sorry. I've heard also Tuakatoto, which I don't think is right. And I just wish we'd try and get, I don't know what the right wording is.
How about we let Mrs. Gardner fill us in here, please?
So you break it up. And Michael Dicker, I'm sure you'll be able to help with this, but so tua is the first bit. So tua ki to.
Thank you.
Remember the vowels. R, E, E.
My audio was never great in any language. Apologies for it.
Thank you,
Louise
please.
set a very good example saying kaitangata as well.
Yes.
Rather than kaitangata.
Yes, thank you. The question I have, and thank you for it, it's a great report, and I've actually made sure that some people who've been contacting with me down there have seen it, and they were really thrilled. It's interesting that the chair has made the comment about seeing it, because it is a large lake, and I have driven around it and tried to access it, and it's actually really difficult. So there's 2 questions I have about your priorities. One is, one of the ones I understand is actually signage to allow people to access it, and creating the access that's better. You come at the moment to, it's barely signposted from the road, and then you get to a gate which is shut. Is that part of those things, but not itemised, that you're looking at in the first year?
Yeah, we have got it in there as a project number 14 on the, what page is it? Page 16.
Was that a priority one?
There's 16 different projects, and it's number 14 on there. But it's not it's a red one because
that's what I mean. It's a red one, so it doesn't get prioritised.
Well, it may get prioritised with the community. So this is just that graph is just a staff recommendation. Yep. So what is the best ecological outcome versus the cheapest? Or so it doesn't give us an amazing ecological outcome by just putting signage and access in, but that it could supplement that by having more people visit. So that's what we need to weigh up with the community.
Okay, great. And the second part of that is the nursery. And I appreciate that of itself won't necessarily have ecological benefits except for maybe locally sourced seeds being grown. As someone trying to buy plants at the moment, it is exceedingly hard, and you're expecting quite a substantial riparian planting here. I'm just wondering, so again, that will be going to the community for consideration, whether they could do it better.
Yep.
Great. And the third question, which I didn't say I was going to have, is financially we're not constrained by the 100, the 84 and the 83, given the reserves in the Kurawao. If there was a demand for more work, is there a potential to do more with that fund?
Dr. Palmer.
Yeah, I guess there is the potential, but you'd have to weigh that up against other things that the fund is used for, like the flood scheme itself and other things in the geographic area to which the endowment fund applies.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Is that you happy with those questioning, Councillor Forbes? And then Councillor.
A great report, Libby. Thank you. Really enjoyed reading it. Not late last night. Get read. And one of the things that it's hard to tell from the map because the maps aren't high enough resolution here. Maybe I should have gone on to Google Maps because you had a bit. But it seems that the catchment, we're working quite low into the catchment. How are you able to work with land owners, users, whatever, further up into the catchment to make sure that what's happening up there isn't? I couldn't see very much in the report about that. Most of it seemed to be back below in the catchment. Yes.
So we will be working with the catchment group further up. So I need to meet with the lead of the current catchment group, because there is a catchment group in that area. I just am not sure how much coverage they have. So one of the projects that we could do is to look at increasing the number of people that are involved within that catchment and supporting that. So that's what we'll go to the community about as well, and see if that's something that they would like us to support.
It is pretty important, isn't it, to make sure that
Yep.
we've got
Totally. Yep.
you're stopping inputs from up there.
Yep. So because we've got high levels of nitrates, phosphates, and E. coli, so we need to stop that coming from up above as well as right beside the lake.
Councillor Forbes, could you turn your microphone on, please? Sorry. My apologies. Sorry,
Try that.
Libby.
Is that on now?
Yes, that's better.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. That's really what I wanted to know. Hopefully
Thank you.
people
Now
heard
we
that.
have Councillor Noon, Councillor Calvert, and then Councillor Hobbs.
Just a couple of questions, not sure whether Libby or Gavin, but it talks about ORC ownership. So does the ownership include the full extent of the lake?
So I did ask our legal team about that, and it's a little bit unclear. So our understanding is that Lynn's own the lake bed,
Yes.
and then around the edge of the lake is ORC controlled, and there is some ORC owned land down the bottom towards the Clutha River that we lease out for grazing. So we still probably need to get a little bit more clarity around exactly what we own with Lynn's. Yeah.
Thank you for that. My other question was just around the recommendation. So I assume where you've got subject to LTP, if this meeting had occurred post council meeting on the 23rd of June, it wouldn't have the clause subject to LTP. That's just a process thing. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noon. Now we have Councillor Calvert, followed by Councillor Hobbs. My apologies, Councillor Kelleher. Councillor K.
Thank you. Councillor Noon covered the first question I had was just around the feasibility study into use of ORC land and getting an understanding of the scale of land and what might be being considered there, because will that be including the Kirrawao lease type land or others that are in that catchment potentially? The other question I had was around funding, and there's a comprehensive list of potential works here, and I guess there's going to be a model put forward for how this will be funded around. I just wonder whether the decision made around Lake Hayes does that excuse me, does that set a precedent now for how this the works that are done here may be funded across this region?
I might interrupt just for a minute, Councillor Kelleher. Are you talking about number 27 where it says the proposed potential projects are listed? Or are you looking at something else? Sorry, I just want to clarify.
Item 27 or the in the report we also state the level of funding that we are considering. Yep. And and what I was reading into that was that it was funded from general.
Yes.
So, and I may be wrong with that, but I just wondered whether Lake Hayes has now set a precedent that we should be considering for a different funding model.
To you, Madam Chair, my recollection is that the two were considered together when it came to appropriate funding arrangements for both of them. And I think there were points of difference around scale and beneficiaries, which meant that they had different ways of being funded, including the opportunity presented with the Kirrawao Reserve in the case of the lake here. However, if there are some larger scale capital type works that emerge from the public consultation, then we might need to revisit how those things are being funded.
Yeah. Cool.
Councillor Hobbs.
Thank you, dear. It's not a question, it's an observation. Ben Ha is just, I don't know, somewhere away, somewhere is a close settlement by it. Just to be aware, and the local community, some in the local community are moving to have that given some heritage status because of its history. Skimmings loos were all made there. It's one of the oldest potteries in New Zealand. And if that were so, and Heritage New Zealand became involved, we were thinking of coffee bars and things in that area that might, this is in the later stages, move on to people being able to walk around the lake and access it. And it becomes a place, an attractive place to visit. Just thought I'd pass that on. And so you can, when you're talking with people, it is in future thinking.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you, if you wouldn't mind. Going back to what Councillor Kelleher said on 27, excuse me for paper shuffling here, the proposed potential projects are the list. Now, when you go back out to the community, do they see this proposed potential list as well? Because, I mean, obviously you're going back to them saying, look, we talked about this, and now we're going to talk about it again. Could be some changes. Yes. Yes. Thank you. And the other thing, Dr. Palmer, is we talked yesterday that the Robson Lagoon is the wetland, am I correct? Part of the wetlands, and the work that's being done there for our shovel ready. Have I got my facts lined up there?
That's correct.
Yes.
Robson Lagoon, which is
Yes.
at the north end of the lake,
Yep.
is the site of one of our 4 shovel-ready projects.
That's right.
It's our smallest project. It's got a total value of $720,000, of which the Crown is funding $320,000. So that project's underway at the moment, and will be delivered over 2 narrow windows of opportunity in the summer.
Yes.
So it's quite exciting because we're addressing some historical conflict between land drainage and ecology, and
Yes.
making both of those things better.
Yes. And lots going on. You know, you've got your hydro, as you say, your land drainage, and you've got all this ecology coming into it. And there's all this interesting life, wildlife, everything, you know, birds, the whole lot. It's full of everything, isn't it, really?
That's right, and just draw the committee's attention to the infographic that's attached as attachment 3, which summarises that what are actually a small set of works that make up that shovel-ready project.
Thank you. Now I see Councillor Calvert, you have a question.
Yes, I've just 2 bits. The first is, I really appreciate the way you've presented this on page 16 by saying proposed potential projects and then showing where, in staff's view, they fit on a value, ecological and other values arrangement. I just had 2 questions about it, however. One of them is that I take it that this is something that staff will carry out. It doesn't come back to us for us to say, yes, do this, yes, do that, or is it something that you're just going to work away with the community about? Or?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we will bring back to committee the outcome of the consultation, and probably a different figure 6 based on the community input, and just get endorsement of the projects we intend undertaking in the first 3 years. So yeah, we'll come back with that.
Right, for our agreement, or for our, just as a noting
I
procedure?
would say for endorsement, agreeing,
Right.
just to make sure there's comfort in terms of the prioritisation.
So the other last bit of the question about this is that often when we have a staff report and it has a staff recommendation, and then when we do consultation, it comes back saying that staff recommend no change, no change, no change, no change. And there's a good reason for that, because you've thought a lot about it and you've already taken into account a lot of the things. But this isn't one of those. I take it this is genuine, that if the locals come back and say it's really important that we do things that you don't necessarily consider, that you are genuinely expecting that would change.
Yes. Yeah. If they feed that back, then we'll definitely.
Do you see the distinction between how we sometimes do things?
Yeah.
And there's a reason for why often they don't change much. I'm just saying that I wouldn't like to see it come back saying we've engaged these people and then we just come back, no change, no change, no change.
That's right. I think the other thing is the project scoping is very high level at the minute, and so part of going to the community is to get more specificity around what these things actually look like. So that may influence prioritisation and where they sit on benefits. So yeah, I'm expecting what comes back to you will probably look different to what you see before you today.
Thank you for that, Councillor Calvert. Libby, are you intending to sort of start this conversation with the community this year, please?
Yes, so we'll start that probably after the 1st of July once we know the long-term plan budgets are all good to go, and then so that we can work with that community and proceed with some of these projects within the first financial year.
Thank you. I noticed too, improved biodiversity on what you plan for this lake on page 22. We talk about the mussels. Need further research into mussel breeding, investigate the possibility of mussel spat ropes in place of culverts. So I'm picking that they would form around like a culvert and so still let the water through, or they're hanging off the side to grow and to feed. Can you just tease it out a wee bit for my visual, please?
They would be placed within the culvert so the water can still flow through. Yeah, it won't impact on the flow. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this wonderful little paper? Councillor Deaker, lovely to see you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Libby, I'm not sure where Robson's Lagoon is. On the map or the photo on page 9, could you guide my eyes to Robson's Lagoon?
It's that middle bit, isn't it? Because the picture over there, see there's the picture over there.
It's at the top, so you can see the. Do you want me to just come and show you?
Oh, it's I can speak to it. It's on the page 19 of the agenda. Is that the map? Okay, page 19 of the agenda. There's a lake. We show the catchment. In the middle of the figure, there's a brown water body. It's the top half of that.
Yeah. Thank you. So there's
north half of that.
That there is a small version of this.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
So is that Robson's Lagoon?
That's the Robson Lagoon improvement area.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to know, Councillor Deaker?
Oh, heaps.
Yep.
I think he wants it to be blue.
It's a cracking little report. Now, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, you're quite happy to go to the recommendations. We've got 1, that the council receives this report. 2, approves the draft outline management for further community engagement to prioritise projects and finalise an implementation plan 2021-22, subject to LTP, and notes the implementation of projects would proceed 2021-22, subject to long-term plan decisions. Now, is there any contrary views? Does anyone want to ask questions, or can we have someone to move this lovely report? Councillor Calvert? Seconded by Councillor Kelleher. All righty. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Dr. Palmer, for a great paper. I shall now call Councillor Scott to do the second part, my co-chair of the biodiversity. Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. Sit in your seat.
Oh, it's nice and warm.
It is.
Cool. How did the last paper go? Good?
Brilliantly.
Great. Welcome to the Implementation Committee paper on biosecurity compliance and enforcement policy. This paper is about establishing a legal framework that underpins the OSC biosecurity approach. What this paper is not about is the bigger biosecurity implementation picture, which will be discussed, I think, at the next meeting of this committee. So, for example, it's general discussion about rabbits or wallabies or so forth. This biosecurity compliance and enforcement policy covers the requirements of both the Biosecurity Act and the Otago Regional Pest Management Plan. It sets out the approach and principles by which the OSC promotes and undertakes biosecurity compliance and enforcement. It sets out the critical expectations for the occupiers and landowners to be compliant. It aims to promote consistency and transparency. Happy to open it up for questions first, and then if there's any debate about the recommendations, welcome to Andrea. Welcome to Gavin. And I acknowledge the report authors, I think Murray and Andrea. Is that fair, Andrea? Thank you. Okay, any questions? Carmen and then Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Andrea and Dr. Palmer. Am I right that this paper is the piece that we're looking for, as in it's got the grunt with the security piece, you know, underpins, and it gives us the actual force and action that we need? We've sort of been, am I correct, missing this for a bit, and it should help steady the ship, if you like, when it comes to implementation. Can you just tease it out a bit more for us, please?
Sure, through the chair. Yes, I mean, we don't necessarily need to have a policy, but it's one that I guess underpins our approach and the principles by which we encourage and undertake compliance. So it's best practice to have a policy that guides operational implementation of the Biosecurity Act and the Regional Pest Management Plan.
But there's a point to this, if I may. It's the fact that our regional council will have the two pieces. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, which a lot of regional councils don't.
That's through the chair. Yes, I think, although I did have a meeting at 4:30 last night, and understand another regional council is just in the process of developing its own unique biosecurity compliance policy, but at the moment there doesn't appear to be anybody else in the country that has one separated from the RMA compliance policy. So we would be the first.
And it gives us that backbone, doesn't it?
Yes. It's the underpinning foundations in which we undertake our activities.
So are we allowed to ask an example of that?
You're allowed to ask anything you like.
Thank you very much.
Whether anybody wants to answer, it's not a matter.
Because if we look at the rabbits, for example, what this one there give us, am I correct, is reading this, is the fact that you can get on and you can do the intent, the direct to actually have the work done. Am I correct? That gives us.
So through the chair, so our regional pest management plan gives us that teeth, but this is, I guess, some assurance to both the public and staff in terms of the way in which we approach compliance, so that it's fair, it's transparent, and that we've considered a number of matters before we make a significant compliance decision. And it's just a very important policy document to guide that. So. And I think it will give us the confidence to fulfil all of the obligations that we have in terms of our responsibilities under the Regional Pest Management Plan better than without it.
So if I take it one step further, just for practicality, it's when you have someone that perhaps isn't doing the job with the rabbits, and then this can come in after much negotiation and all the paperwork in the world to actually do the work for them. Am I correct? Because we've got this now sitting behind us, this underpinning.
Through the chair, so yes, and what the policy proposes is that we have, I suppose we put more emphasis on the informal approach to pests that maybe are in large scale, but not necessarily huge impact. However, it gives us the opportunity to accelerate some of and bypass some of the informal approaches to go straight into a notice of direction, so that a formal requirement to act. It's not appropriate nor, I guess, cost effective to use that approach for absolutely every single pest in the region, but particularly rabbits, or for example, if we suddenly had an increase in wallaby sightings where we wanted to be able to take legal action in a very swift, timely manner, this allows us to do that.
Thank you. Answer my questions. Appreciate it.
That's right. Just before I go to Michael, yeah, Andrea, I mean, it talks about your methods to achieve compliance, where there's the 4 E's: enable, engage, educate, enforce. I think you've talked a bit about that. Thank you. Michael.
I've got a number of questions to ask. It seems
sorry, Gary.
a bit missing from this paper.
Microphone.
Is it on?
Yep.
Seems there's a bit missing. Well, there's quite a few bits actually, and I wonder if they should not be part of this paper, particularly when it comes to the principles that you're establishing. One of them is the principle of non-favoritism. Now, you've got a principle there of consistency, but it doesn't actually talk about favouring, and I am concerned about the fact that, in fact, this particular organisation has favoured TAs and government agencies in the past over individuals. So what I'm trying to ensure is that we treat everybody the same way, whether they are a TA, a government department, or an individual. Can I give you an example on rabbits? The Department of Conservation and their lack of rabbit control. Now, if we went into the Department of Conservation tomorrow, I suspect we'd find they're non-compliant with our rabbit policy. So what I'm trying to ensure is that there is a principle of non-favoritism, or a principle that we treat everybody the same, regardless of whether you are a government agency or department, a territorial authority or corporation, or an individual farmer or landowner. Please comment.
Through the chair, we can add that in, but it's our obligation to treat everybody the same in accordance to our regional pest management plan. So we will be doing that. We're working actively with the Department of Conservation and territorial local authorities who are, for example, undertaking and have committed to undertake pest management. Obviously, or in some cases, their budgets don't necessarily allow, but we'll be having those conversations so that they understand their obligations.
Go, you see? You've just said it. There you go. I'm glad that's on the record. I really am.
Through the
No, I don't care. I'm glad it's on the record.
One at a time.
No, that is not what, sorry.
Sorry, through the chair, the budget is irrelevant in terms of our statutory requirements and how we conduct those. So I mentioned it, but it is irrelevant.
It is irrelevant.
Yes.
Right. So we are going to, so the principle of non-favoritism is an important principle, I would have thought.
Michael, can I just before I go to Sarah, I mean, I think that's what this whole paper is all about, isn't it? To put on the table what are the principles of compliance and enforcement: transparency, consistency, fair and reasonable evidence based, and so forth. I think Andrea's responded. Sarah.
My point would be, I think you have to read the policy in the round. So there are a number of the principles that would draw you to an approach that doesn't show favouritism, despite the fact that under the Biosecurity Act, you might be required to deal with different landowners differently. So, you know, I would think transparency, consistency of process, fair, reasonable, and proportional are all things, lawful, ethical, and accountable, all areas that bring you to that approach.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. Are we finished, Michael?
No, not at all. Gosh, we've just started on this one.
Now, just bear in mind, we are talking about the legal approach, not the wider implementation process.
No, but it is.
Yes.
I think it's a really important principle to put into this paper, that we will treat public sector exactly the same way that we will treat the private sector and individuals. Because we have been in the past, and I'll give you another very good example that's just been around this table recently, the way in which we enforce and comply resource consents to do with wastewater treatment plants. Okay, another good example where we've let TAs get away with it.
Just pass me over. What the hell are you talking about?
That's right.
Excuse me. Any comments through the chair? Okay. It wasn't an unreasonable comment that Councillor Laws made. Okay. What he's basically talking about is that in our council's history, you know, we had, for example, we had a prosecution with First Wastewater.
He gave.
Okay. Good.
Wastewater treatment plants.
Carry on, Michael.
In fact, if I can help remember, one of the issues in front of the Three Waters reform that has been dramatically
we are talking about biosecurity.
Yeah,
of course.
I know, but I'm just saying.
Okay, but
was the non-compliance of TAs related to wastewater treatment plants and the fact that resource consents weren't monitored by regional councils.
Yeah.
Now that was highlighted just
Yeah.
recently, and I think the last 48 hours with the paper that's come out of central government.
Yeah. But I
Just wanted to make sure that this paper, in actual fact, clearly establishes that we will treat public entities the same way that we will treat private entities. And I do think that's missing from this paper,
Okay, well, you've made your point.
given past practice.
And your question is?
But why isn't it there? Given
I think Andrew has actually already answered it, but do you want to have another go at it, Gavin?
Well, I think Mrs. Gardner's answered the question, but it's intended to be tenure neutral, and that's our, regardless of whom owns and all of that, that's the intention.
Yeah.
We're very happy to add some wording to that effect in the consistency bit, just to put that beyond doubt.
and the reason that I would raise that is because of past practice. So what we are indicating is that this is our policy going forward. Those looking from outside might say, does that mean you'll still treat public entities different than you'll treat private ones? So I do think it needs to go into this.
Okay, you've made your point, and the staff have responded, I think, pretty well. Are we done?
Well, no, we haven't got an answer. I mean, that might be an answer that supports you, Brian, but no, I don't have an answer on that one. Staff have responded well. Does that mean it's going to go in or it isn't?
That's good. And add some words around consistency.
Exactly.
If you can either put a motion.
The public entities. Oh, okay, well then I'll raise that issue when we come to it in debate. The second issue relates to cost recovery on legal costs. You've got a little bit there at the end, but in actual fact, it's quite, I would suggest to you, problematic. There isn't actually a principle on the cost of on the recovery of legal costs of ORC. It's left to discretion in this paper. And I don't think, given that the rest of the paper is setting out policy guidelines and principles, to leave that to discretion strikes me as rather odd. Why?
Through the chair, it's not discretionary. It's just that it's a different process. So the fees are set through the annual plan. So we just need to follow that. We've got a proposed fee schedule, but my understanding is that fees are set through the annual plan process. So we just need to align those two up.
Talking two totally different things, I'm sorry. The long-term plan sets out your costs and your structures. This is about a policy or principle to go and recover those fees after you've taken that action. That isn't in the long-term plan.
Through the chair, so we've signalled that we will undertake cost recovery. We just haven't signalled what the amount is. It's
not. No, see?
What would you suggest, Councillor?
Well, I would suggest that we need, if you go to page 40, and it is the first paragraph on section 7, headline cost recovery. It says the BSA gives the power for ORC to recover the costs associated with its compliance. The whole rest of this policy is about setting policy guidelines and principles about which we're going to enact, but that one there is left silent. Now, it's actually quite important.
Sorry, Michael, I haven't actually, whereabouts is it?
Section 7, cost recovery, it's my page 40.
Page 40, bottom of page 40 it is.
Okay.
40
It's the first sentence of the first paragraph.
Okay, the BSA gives the power for the ORC to recover the costs.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the next piece, can I just help with that?
Yes, certainly, Sarah. Apologies.
I think I'm helping with your point, which is the next piece, which says how ORC recovers its costs is detailed in its LTP or annual plan each year.
So I saw that, and I went to the long-term plan. I couldn't find anything that says how we're going to recover our fees and what the policy guidelines or principles are.
Through the chair, that's correct, because we needed to get the policy approved first, which is what we're doing today, and then we would set the fees.
Yeah, that's not really an answer, is it? Sorry, I'm going to badger this one. The fact is we need a policy guideline or principle.
Doesn't it follow under recovery of non-compliance costs, recovery of default work costs?
No, because it allows a discretion.
Wow.
Well, there is a level of discretion in the sense that if we have a variety of opportunities where we might, for example, require work to be done or in fact arrange for work to be done, we can't cost, it's not as simple as there's a fee for X, because
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. You go to court, you take somebody to court and you prosecute them. Okay. It should be a policy principle, surely, that if you are successful in your contribution or in your prosecution, you recover full costs of that prosecution. And at the moment, we don't.
We don't in any case.
No, exactly. And one of the things that
You
would
asked
drive,
to.
can I tell you, one of the things that would drive is compliance. Would certainly have an effect upon TAs to know, in particular, or those who are breaching their resource consents, that if you are prosecuted, you're not only going to be up for whatever the courts say, but the ORC is actually going to sue for the full cost of recovery.
Okay, so Councillor Laws has made this comment. This has put his thought on the table. We have got a number of speakers, but is there any speaker that wants to reply to that?
I do think there's a good point raised here,
Yeah, I do too.
and I think it needs working through.
Okay, well, in relation to this point, Gary, did you have any comment?
Yeah, well, I do, because I mean, it was one I was going to raise, but possibly slightly differently in a way, because there has been this noticeable difference to the community between how private individuals and how councils and other sort of government departments have been treated, and that may be wrong and it may be right. That's the community perception, and what I'm saying is just around community perception.
Yeah.
Where my concern was around the cost recovery, and then this paper has gone to, I was perfectly okay with the paper until I got to item 20, and it gives an example of how a compliance process may actually apply. And that is to rapid increase of wallaby sightings accompanied by landowner apathy. Now, if you take that one example, wallabies are...
Sorry, which page are we on there?
Sorry, that's on page 29. And
29,
it's just above the options section. And
It's on the actual paper, not in the...
Yeah, in the actual paper, the staff paper itself. And then, so when I looked at that example, and given that wallabies are totally new, that there isn't methodology out there that has been tried and proven across Otago, and one sighting is a massive increase on what previously per property, there is actually a possibility. What is landowner apathy? Because a landowner will shoot them if we see them, but if we miss them, which is rare in my case and not so in Councillor Malcolm's case,
We'll take note of that.
we will. That situation then suddenly appears that could be landowner apathy, and suddenly then, I mean, wallaby control is incredibly expensive versus other control, and it's new. So that extent is actually a real concern. So if we are creating a policy beyond what we currently have, I think there's some clarification needed, and certainly the points raised by Councillor Laws.
Sarah.
I think there's an important point that is worth just remembering in regards to the Pest Management Plan, and in fact the Biosecurity Act 1993. And that's up until this Pest Management Plan, we did not have the provision of the Good Neighbour Rule. And Section 69(5) of the Biosecurity Act says a Good Neighbour Rule in a plan or action taken under a plan to enforce a Good Neighbour Rule in the plan are the only ways in which a plan may cause the Crown to become liable to meet its obligations or costs. So the unfavourable, or whatever the term was that Councillor Laws was using, we need to remember that in the context of what is actually available to us in the Pest Management Plan. And I think that's a very important distinction to make. The powers are constrained to the Good Neighbour Rule, of which we didn't have one before we implemented this current Pest Management Plan. So all I'm saying is Councillor Laws is making an argument, but I don't think you can look at his argument in isolation of the Act and the Pest Management Plan.
Sorry, first of all...
Excuse me, one person at a time. You finished, Gary?
Yeah, I'm good.
Sarah's made her point. I'm going to go to Gretchen.
Yeah, so in the pest plan, the Crown is required to control strips around their boundary, and that's it. They don't have to do anything else on their own land. So that's the difference. Same with wilding trees, and yeah, a different approach. So I think what the staff have been saying is that we would consistently enforce or educate or whatever, consistently our rules, but we can only do what we can do under the Biosecurity Act. But anyway, do people want us to talk about this, or can I ask my question as well?
I think we'll put this particular issue to bed. So Councillor Laws and Gary, Councillor Callaghan.
Can I ask the question? The CE has only actually talked about government. She hasn't talked about territorial authorities who are not protected by a good neighbour or the Biosecurity Act. And I go back to my point that I've said again, we have a past history that isn't particularly pleasant of treating territorial authorities differently when they transgress our resource consents than we do of individuals.
Okay.
So I'm going back to the point of this fearless approach to treating or non-favoritism, that we will treat all entities the same, whether they be corporate, public or individual.
Yeah, well, I suspect based on the good neighbour rule and the points that...
No, you're missing the point.
Use the Department of Conservation.
Yeah, exactly. The words need to be treated with care. Staff have given an undertaking that they will look at some of the words. If you're unsatisfied, you can always put a motion on the table. Is there any other comment in relation to this particular matter? Okay, Councillor Malcolm, then Councillor Calvert.
So I read on page 29, it is regarding this matter where you have your addendum at the bottom, work with Environment in Canterbury dealing with feral rabbit densities exceeding allowance level. I can cite an instance in the Hecatoramia Valley where they in fact did put a notice of direction on dock, and that was around wallaby infestation, and that led to a mass killing. Exceptionally good work. So I've read this in light of staff obviously being familiar with what ECAN is doing. So I just wonder if you could check out that how they actually action that with DOC, maybe of pretty good assistance to you. It was exceptionally well received by the neighbours with that problem of the wallabies, and I think in one fell swoop they annihilated 1,500 of the little darlings. So if I go just continuing on this on the fees, and I just wonder, legal cost does worry me, because often that is the thing that we hear about, that we never actually we have got recover. That's on page 41 of the second recovery of non-compliance costs. We do say advanced work and reasonable costs, but I wonder if we should, and if that's the intent, is if reasonable costs include reasonable legal costs, if we could actually put reasonable costs including reasonable legal costs. But that would have to be the intent of the ORC to actually pursue legal costs.
I'm not providing legal advice, just to be clear, but my understanding is that in a court process, there are particular costs that you can recover through a court process. They are never the full costs. So there is a limitation on what we would be able to seek through court anyway.
Yeah.
And so further that, under recovery of default costs, default work costs, my experience with rabbits, and it is going back to the 90s, is that a regional council has at that stage had the authority that if you didn't pay for the work in killing the rabbits, that they could actually put that would be registered against your property, but also the bank would be contacted and the bank would pay that if you had in fact had a mortgage.
Andrew or Gavin, any comment on that one?
Through the chair, I'm not entirely sure about the bank part, but yes, we can definitely put a cost on the charge of the land, and if the land changes ownership, then the recovery of those costs would be taken into consideration or recovered.
Yeah, so I think the Act actually goes further, and at that stage it did go further. I'll tell you about it later. But yeah, the bank actually would have paid that debt because they
point
were
made.
were
Yeah.
the owners.
Yeah.
What they would have done. Yeah, yeah. So I just wonder if you could check that out, if that's still part. It would just change the wording there, because if it was a property with a mortgage on it, we would not have to wait the next centennial celebrations at Lawrence before the family farm changed hands.
Okay, but you've taken a note of that, Andrea. I'm conscious that I've sort of bypassed Councillor Robinson, but you're on this particular matter, Councillor Calvert. Cool.
I'm suggesting maybe we can get through this by changing that, not recommendation, what options, to have option 1 approve this policy with changes to the wording to make clear that we will use all our abilities to follow through the maximum costs and whatever in way of local government and things. And there's several places that could come in here. What I would just like to suggest is that it's clear when somebody reads this that they see that we are taking all opportunities we can, which are limited to the good neighbour rule and limited in a variety of ways. But when we have a choice, we charge local authorities and other landowners with the same sort of approach as we do with the rest. So I'm just saying, can we choose option 1 with wording in the several places where it would be to make it clear that this applies to us using our maximum powers in taking any communal, I don't know what, local or national.
Yeah, no, thank you,
whatever
Councillor
Michael is
Calvert.
suggesting. I'm just saying if we could add that in, because I think people would like to see in that something that says we will actually, and what we can do is limited, and what the court will do in the way of backing us up. But what we're saying is, when somebody says, so what remedy do you want? The remedy we want is going to be as at least as much in a territorial authority as we would with anyone else or in government. Does that satisfy Michael's?
Can I give you the really good example, and it's the most recent one?
Sorry, excuse me. I've asked Councillor Calvert to say her bit. She said her bit. The next speaker is Councillor Robinson.
Answer me a question. Sorry.
Oh, well,
that's right.
The councillor doesn't ask you a question.
That's fair enough. That's all right. It's all right.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Before this conversation started, this was my question, but it's kind of leads on, which is around consistency. And actually, I'm really proud of the council's approach now, which is really objective under Richard and his team for compliance and enforcement and going through to the legal steps, which is just a really objective process no matter who you are. So my question is, with regards to this, we're establishing something similar, different of course because different legislation, but an objective process for how we would treat people the same. But my question is around, if we follow that through really objectively, how much influence can we have around the table then of thinking that our current priority might be something we've been talking to people in our neighbourhood about, or might be this or might be that, versus there's the pest plan now, which has certain statuses for certain pests. So those, if they've got the same status, they're treated under the same principles. And same with how we would enforce too. That would just go through a process that we didn't really need to get involved in then, I think, which is brilliant. It takes all that political stuff out of it, I would think. So I guess the question is, are we going for an approach like that that's just really objective, or is there still going to be quite a bit of discretion around the table to talk about approaches and different species?
Yeah. I'm going to make a comment prior to Andrew or Gavin, if I may. The first is that this policy actually, as you say, encapsulates a lot of work that has gone through due process in terms of the Biosecurity Act, in terms of the Pest Management Plan. It encapsulates the enforcement processes the best between the RMA and the Biosecurity Act. And here we have it here in terms of some broad principles that need to be exercised in a fair and reasonable manner, as opposed to maxed out or whatever. In my view, it's actually not appropriate to go off to these particular issues of a particular era or whatever. We've been through a due process. And I also make the point that this policy is actually, as it's been said, is relatively groundbreaking in terms of it's the first or the second policy that actually makes it quite clear about compliance principles and our enforcement actions. It differentiates between the RMA and the Biosecurity Act. It's actually a really positive step forward, and we've left enough scope in it for it to be exercised in a fair and reasonable manner. I've said my bit. Any comment?
Through the chair, thank you. The operational plan, we're required to develop an operational plan each year. So I assume that will be coming to the next 23rd of June council meeting. So that's an opportunity, I guess, for council input into prioritisation of pests. The reality, I believe, is that ideally we should be working at the eradication end of the scale, not necessarily at the progressive and containment, but we've got some catching up to do, particularly around compliance with things like rabbits. So we need to be operating a model that addresses the immediate problems and tries to reduce them, as well as operating in that more proactive space.
Cool.
So the operational plan is the prioritisation of resources against effort.
Thank you. I'm moving to the end of our question section. I have got a question in the corner from Kate, and I see a hand to my right as well, possibly Kate. Questions? And Carmen.
Look, thank you. I think it's a great report, but I just want to end on policy. It's a timeliness one that for me that isn't covered, because there is no time frames in any of these, which surprises me, and what the policy is for doing things. Now, I appreciate that what you have to do within 6 weeks may be different depending on the urgency, but it doesn't speak to the timeliness of providing what the notice will be, and whether that should be covered in there, because, again, seasonality of some pests. Was it too complicated?
Sorry, there's a difference between policy and procedure, and so this is the very high level policy, and I think a number of the things that are being discussed by the committee are actually the implementation of policy. And it gets down to the procedural level where you have time frames and authorities and that kind of thing. So that's where you would see that level of detail. The thing that sits below this, which is around the procedure.
Okay. And the only other question is, and so it's detailed, the accelerated compliance for priority pest issues, which is what you've got on your diagram in figure 2. Although I don't think it's limited just to priority pest issues, and that if there's something that came up that was absolutely urgent that you got on top of, I'm thinking some of the moths that have come into Auckland, for example, not that this will be covered here, but that you would potentially do an accelerated compliance for something that's absolutely urgent.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. And accelerated compliance, I guess, is slightly misleading in that it's they are the jumping to the legally enforceable steps. So the rest of it is around the engagement and the education. So it's not actually a compliance process, but it's missing out all the, potentially 6 months of interaction with the landowner to encourage voluntary compliance and getting straight into the legal definition of enforcement and compliance process. So yes, in answer to your question, it allows us to rapidly move onto something if a new pest emerges.
Yeah, it's just that you've got it in the pictures and in the wording that's for just pest control.
Yes.
And so my last question is, and it's just a technical, in your table on page 8, table 1, on the left hand side, I was thinking that on the second page, page 8, was enforcement steps rather than formal actions, and I actually think there's formal actions and then enforcement, which is slightly different. But I presume that the left hand side, which is empty in 8 on page 8, is meant to be formal actions.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Carmen, I'm moving to the end of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Haven't finished yet.
I'll come to you, Councillor Laws, but at some point I'll be wrapping it up.
Thank you. And Ms. Howard, excuse me, I have a question for you, and I'm not sure if this is in the policy, but we need to explore it, please. You have the peri-urban and you have the landowner, and there's some rules, am I right, like, you know, above 20 hectares or under. Does this policy also draw out the differences so that everything is fair, if you like? Where do we sit on this? Please.
Through the chair, so that's a question around the applicability or not of our compliance tools to different landscapes and land sizes.
Yes.
The compliance tool that we have in our pest management plan was designed some time ago and is fit for purpose for large areas and less fit for purpose for smaller areas. So we are undertaking some work to determine whether there are other compliance tools that might be suitable for smaller land sizes. At the moment, what we have in terms of formal compliance works best for larger properties, and we have to rely on more informal facilitation, collaboration actions, the smaller the property size, just because the tool was created for a different purpose. Landscape has changed, and you know, it's quite unique to Otago, so it's not necessarily something that everybody else in New Zealand is thinking about, but it is something that we're actively pursuing other options.
Yeah, so there's some work to do there. Thank you. Councillor Laws, last question.
The other thing I was wondering that seems to be missing here, and I'd have it there, is what you do after you've finished your enforcement. And that is the transparency of the process in terms of the communication or the publication of the result. It's missing from here, and I would have thought it was part of it. So, for example, if you've successfully prosecuted somebody, you will notify or put out a press release or something along those lines. And again, that has, I would think, significant risk aversion issues for reading that and going, so it's also the reporting back to this body as well. So it's the reporting publication mechanisms that would occur after you've completed the process.
Through the chair, so at the almost regularly quarterly update reports that I write,
No. It's not that what you do now. I'm saying it should be a part of this policy.
I can help with that. There are rules that we operate under in both RMA compliance, and that would be applicable here, around the Attorney General's advice about how you are to handle information and findings through the court. So there are particular times at which we're able to release that sort of information publicly, and they are what we follow.
Surely that should be part of this policy. No one knows what those rules are. I don't know. You're saying Attorney General's got these rules and regulations. I haven't got a clue what they are. Neither with the public. So why wouldn't you put this as part of your policy?
Any comments there, Gavin or Andrea? Like, is that something you might consider? Because we've got a few points for consideration.
Through the chair, so the Biosecurity Act, very rarely we would enter into prosecution. So it's more the notice of direction and then the final stage where we undertake default work.
Yes.
So there would just be a simple question that we would get legal advice on the privacy law around releasing people's names it doesn't go through a court system. So
Yeah. Does that need to be encapsulated in the policy?
Yes,
or?
we can incorporate that.
Yeah. Actually, and while you're doing a few changes there, I noticed the page 32, the first line on the third paragraph, you've repeated a bit there, needs to be corrected. Okay, so there it is. We've got 2 recommendations to kick off. We've had, there has been some debate that sneaked into question time. Do we have to kick things off, do we have a mover for the recommendations in a second? We've got Councillor Forbes, Councillor Robertson. Okay. Councillor Noon, just to kick things off, any comments from your perspective? You've been a panel member on the Pest Management Plan, and with the consideration of the Biosecurity Act, you've had a chance to have a look at this policy. Are you feeling comfortable about it? It's obviously higher arch principles as opposed to the implementation detail, and to be exercised in a fair and reasonable manner.
Well, I do recall Andrew making the comment in the last 6 months or so that we haven't quite got all the teeth that we need in the pest management plan. So that's still ringing in my ear. So this looks like this is going to fill the void. The background, or the policy paper and the discussion around the detail of it, I think it is a good opportunity to make sure that we have a robust policy that is able to achieve the intent of the pest management plan, and obviously it sits under the Biosecurity Act. Understand all that. So this is, I think, is a positive step forward.
Yeah.
And it means, I suppose, it gives some clarity for the compliance team as they try and be as effective as they can within the framework of the policy we've got. So yeah, I'm feeling positive about it. I hear the discussion about the wording, etc., but I believe Andrew and Gavin would have picked up on that, and if some minor tweaks can be made to make it really, really clear about what sort of processes we'll follow in terms of cost recovery and consistency, whether it's the individual private landowner or some larger entity, whether it's a TA or a Crown agency or whatever. Yeah, we must be consistent, absolutely, and we need to send that signal across all sectors of the community. So I think that's important. That's the way we do our business, or the way we should be doing our business.
Good. Any other debate, discussion around the?
So I'd like to move a motion.
Sure.
That the draft biosecurity compliance and enforcement policy.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, like,
well, this is an amendment to it then.
Okay.
That the draft biosecurity compliance and enforcement policy include an explanation that the Crown, comma, under existing legislation, comma, exempt from the same compliance strictures that are enforced upon individuals. Other agencies. The reason I'm happy to speak to this, but the reason I'm putting it there is because I think it needs to be clearly established that the Crown has given itself an out, and that we will not and cannot be as non-favourite or as blind in terms of justice as we would like to be. It is appalling that the Crown is allowed to escape what others, the rules that we will enforce upon others, and I think it needs to be noted in our policy.
Okay, so we've got this amendment. We'll have a discussion on this amendment, but I'll put a question to our CE, Sarah. Like, I think in terms of the point that's endeavouring to be made, should there simply be just a reference to the good neighbour rule? which is the correct way of actually getting the outcome that
You can do that. I mean, I suppose the point I was making before is I think you can't read the policy in isolation
Yeah.
from the pest plan and the Biodiversity Act.
Yeah.
And that was really
Biosecurity
my
Act.
point. Sorry.
So Biosecurity Act.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was really my point. I think, you know, you have to understand the cascade and what each provides
yeah,
in order to be able to understand fully what you're able to do and what you're not able to do.
yeah,
So that
Yeah,
was really my point.
yeah.
So,
So-
I think the three serve a purpose.
yeah. I suspect, Councillor Laws is trying to just get some clarity so everybody understands exactly what the situation is for government agencies. Liz, are you able to put that on the screen so we know what we're discussing?
Chair, can I please just ask a bit of a question there? Because I haven't got that, your motion fully in my head,
Yeah.
Michael, but I'm concerned about what Gretchen was saying under the Crown lands.
Oh, just under the Biosecurity Act, what
Under
good
the Act.
neighbour role could actually
Yeah.
go.
So we would be limited
Yes.
to enforcement only in that strip that they
That's
have
right.
to do
Correct.
that.
So in other words, the Department of Conservation can have rabbits running rampant through all its land. We're enforcing everywhere along the line, prosecuting potentially individuals, but let them go.
And so we can,
No, we can
our
only-
enforcement will be limited to that one strip that they have to get through.
Exactly. So, I mean,
Which would, of course, support good neighbouring.
I'll
So
second
that's
that if we're
probably-
talking to it.
Okay, we're going to
Yeah,
second
thanks.
Councillor Calvert. So, so what this amendment is doing is not putting specific words into the policy. It's asking that some explanation
correct.
is provided, and that may refer to the good neighbour
I
role and
think
so
you just
forth.
need to.
Yeah,
My
good.
purpose, if I can help you, why don't you
Yes.
just refer to the section in the Act, which is 69 clause 5.
Do that, but it needs to be in this policy.
Yeah, and staff can do something like that, but the actual amendment itself is just asking that some appropriate explanation
Correct.
is provided.
And Sarah has asked, quite rightly so, you tell us what you want. Don't leave it to us to make it up after you've had your discussion. And what this does is allow that clarity and then let staff bring their expertise to framing the right words for this particular
Okay,
policy.
we've got some hands in the air. Councillor Calvert first as a second. Any comment at this point?
No, I think that takes it where it needs to go and allows our staff to produce
Yeah,
the explanation,
good. Okay,
having listened to what we're hoping for.
okay, we've got Councillor Robson and Councillor Hobbs.
Just-
Sorry, Kevin.
I
Yeah,
don't have a major with that because it's fact, except for the second bit is exempt from same compliance structures enforced upon individuals. It's not structures. because
Strictures.
Structures.
yeah.
Oh. What is it?
Stricture is a mechanism by which you bind.
Okay. You're probably right, but I'm just wanting to say that they're exempt from our policy we're trying
Right.
to create here.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether it might accidentally say
All right,
that.
so the same compliance.
Exempt by government.
Features,
Rules.
rules, yeah, guidelines,
All of those.
all of the
All of
above.
those,
Yeah.
Those are really important.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're asking our staff to
Yes.
Fixes up for-
take the message and do the appropriate wording. So best of luck there,
Something
Dr.
that's really
Palmer
bugged me
and
for a
Andrea.
while.
I've got Councillor Hobbs, sorry, apologies.
I'm feeling most uncomfortable about this.
Yeah,
And the reason I'm feeling uncomfortable is that the only, and maybe other people have got other examples, I keep on hearing that government departments are deliberately ignoring good neighbour rules
yes,
around rabbits or wallabies, and that when we might draw their attention to that on their land, they just go up you. That's what that sounds like to me. And I would feel very uncomfortable about supporting that.
yeah, so it's sort of written in the negative as opposed to the positive.
Yes.
It just
It's
needs,
not a positive.
yeah. but
I'm
it-
sorry, can I just, sorry, Michael.
Yes,
all right.
yes, certainly, sorry.
I just feel, it feels to me like a
Yeah.
conversation in a bar in
Yeah.
which somebody says, well, I'm not doing anything because the bloody doc's not doing anything. And it doesn't sound,
Yeah.
it doesn't have the kind of weight that I expect from a body like this.
Well said. Councillor Hobbs, thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
I have some sympathy with the direction of that, because as a layman reading a policy, and it refers to nothing about a Crown entity having to be treated differently because of X, I would then probably go to the pub and say, well, why isn't ORC doing something? Because here's the policy saying they should be doing something. So it is all about the wording of giving the layperson knowledge that they will be treated, but there are different rules that apply.
No, point made. Thank you. Councillor Hope and then Councillor Wilson.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, and I appreciate what you say, Councillor Hobbs, but I have seen and had people ring me and say, but I've just spent $10,000 on my rabbit contractor and my guy's shooting, and yet I cannot get this government department to do anything. So I like where we're going with this, and it's just gives them the tools. That's how I see it.
I don't like, as Councillor Hobbs, I don't like the way it's sort of going, but I think what Councillor Laws is endeavouring to do is just put the facts on the table. Councillor Wilson.
I have some sympathy with the problem, and that the very first phone call I got as a regional councillor was from people down at Waihola who had issues with rabbits on Kiwi rail land. What this doesn't do for me is actually that clarity between the Crown as a ministry like DOC and whether Kiwi rail or NZTA similarly, because they're slightly different, or an SOE, and that I can't actually fathom, and you may have a better understanding than that, Andrea, than I do.
Explanation or clarify.
Yeah.
Through the chair, my understanding is they are Crown agencies, but we can just have the definition.
Yeah.
Crown entities are in or out.
And SOEs, because they're.
Well, I'll just look at the definition. Yeah.
I'm finding it difficult. I haven't had time to check it, but they are really live issues for a lot of people. And the good thing about Kiwi Rail and NZTA land is generally that they're narrower than 200 metres, but they are live issues. So I think it would be helpful for us in explaining it and people reading it that they understand that.
Okay, so CS Sarah is just having a look at that, whether the word Crown needs to be expanded. But while that's happening, Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, I certainly have sympathy for what we have there. But it's just they're not totally exempt. Under the Good Neighbour rule, there's a strip around that. We will still enforce and prosecute and do whatever on that strip. It's just the difference is we will require a landowner to do all of their 10,000 hectares and remove the problem completely from their 10,000 hectares. We will require DOC next door to only enforce a strip or have control on a strip, and they may continue with a problem sitting totally within it. And so what this does is clarify the difference.
Yeah, well, and hopefully staff will look at this and write it in the appropriate fashion, but I think we've given them the message.
Yeah, thank you. John, just speaking in reply very quickly, I note that the Taranaki District Council have just done a pest management, Taranaki Regional Council, in which they, as part of their consultation process, deliberately highlighted the fact that the Crown is bound by different rules.
Oh, and I thought it was your original idea.
Well, no. I just looked it up subsequent. There you go.
I'm going to put this motion amendment, so at least get some agreement where we're going on that. Those for?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. On that basis, let's move to the other two recommendations. And can I say before we do that, staff will also, can I encourage staff to just consider whether it's Crown or Crown/Crown agencies, because that was the spirit, I think, of the motion. Okay, so we've got the final recommendation here. It encapsulates the amendment as well. Where does the amendment fit in this? Is this coming in at number 3? Number 3. Okay, so we've got recommendation 1, we received the report. Number 2, that we approve and adopt the ORC biosecurity compliance enforcement policy, and recommendation 3, the amendment. Any discussion, any further discussion? I think we've done pretty good. If not, I'm going to put the motion.
Sorry, could you repeat what we're just about to vote on?
We're going to vote on page 26 of 41, where there's 2 recommendations, and we've added a 3rd recommendation, which is the amendment which we've just approved.
Right.
So the first recommendation is simply to receive, the next one is to approve and adopt, and the 3rd one is the amendment. I'm going to put the motion, those for. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And I will close this meeting of the Implementation Committee with Councillor Hope. Thank you.
Thank you.